Here we go.
Looks like we're good to go, eh?
You're on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Truth to Power. Excited to be here. Truth to Power is the first in what's going to be a series of panel discussions addressing issues of diversity and inclusion in the American thoroughbred industry. The next couple, obviously, this is our maiden voyage, and by the way, it's our maiden voyage, so cut us a little slack on the on some tech issues we're struggling with here. We're running a little bit behind time, but we're going to get ourselves caught up here. Our next couple are planned for March 17th and April 17th. Hope you can join us for those, and of course, appreciate your being here today. My name is Frank Vespi. I am the founder and publisher of The Racing Biz. We are a media company focused on covering thoroughbred racing and breeding in the Mid-Atlantic region. I am super excited and really pleased that we can present this series of panel discussions. I welcome the folks watching on Facebook, on Twitter, on theracingbiz.com, and hopefully many more will find us in the archives once we're done here today. I want to give a special thanks to my two amazing partners in putting this together, Alicia Hughes of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, Teresa Gennaro, a teacher and freelance journalist. They both did incredible work in bringing these ideas to fruition. And in fact, the ideas that became Truth to Power were born out of conversations that I was having with them and with some other folks. Today's panel is going to include, well, we're going to have to see who it includes exactly, but it'll include Rose Grissell. She is the head of diversity and inclusion for the British Horseracing Authority. We'll have some video snippets of a conversation I had with Rose the other day. They're doing some really interesting work in Britain to try and increase diversity and inclusion in their horse racing industry. Also going to include Greg Harbut. Greg is a third-generation horseman. His great-grandfather was the groom for Man o' War, which makes him the coolest person on this panel by far, and a guy with a lot of interesting experience and insights into the industry. He these days is a bloodstock agent. He works to put together ownership syndicates, and he had a horse in the 2020 Kentucky Derby in Necker Island who ran 9th. And most of us would kill to have a horse run 9th in the Kentucky Derby. Pretty cool stuff. One of his partners is hopefully going to be joining us, is scheduled to join us. That's Ray Daniels. Ray, in addition to being a partner on Necker Island, worked for Waffle House Inc. for many years. He was the Director of Diversity and Minority Affairs. Later on, he was the VP of Operations. He was also a franchisee. And he also founded Equity Solutions Group, a strategic sourcing company. So some interesting people are going to have some good things to say, and I'm going to let them say them in just a moment. Over the last year, as the United States has faced something of a reckoning with racial issues, the thoroughbred industry has faced its own challenges in confronting racism and in embracing diversity. And I think it's fair to say the industry's response has been uneven and inconsistent. We believe it's time, really past time, for the industry to start having a conversation about these issues and about what the future is going to look like. And with Truth to Power, we're hoping to spur that conversation. Over the coming panels, we're going to bring you a wide diversity of people inside the industry, outside the industry, wide array of expertise. And we want to address questions like, where is the industry today? Why are diversity and inclusion important to the future of the industry? And what are some of the steps we can take to begin that journey? So we got a great group of people here. We got a lot of experience, which means more from them and less from me. Before we really dig into the panel, I want to ask my two co-organizers if they want to chime in as well. I know, Alicia, you had indicated you wanted to say a few words at the top here, so I'm going to turn it over to Alicia for the moment.
Thank you, Frank. I mean, first and foremost, I want to thank yourself and Teresa for organizing this and giving us a platform to share our perspectives, to speak our truth, and to really hopefully hold this industry accountable. We're going to probably say some things today and going forward that are going to make some people uncomfortable, probably going to make some people very mad. And to that, I say good, because no change happens until people are willing to get uncomfortable. And I ask that for anybody watching, if anything we say hits you in a certain way, that maybe you reflect on why it's hitting you a certain way, that you recognize your privilege, you own it, and then you let it go.
You are the disruptor. That's what Alicia had said to me by email today, and so we're owning it. Teresa, do you want to chime in on anything as another co-organizer?
Sure. Frank, you said that you thought that the industry response to the events of the last year has been inconsistent and uneven, and I would add to that inadequate. Many racing organizations haven't even acknowledged what has happened in the country over the last year. You can look at the leadership groups around racing, from the jockey club to boards to racing executives. They are almost exclusively one particular demographic. And in 2021 America, that doesn't seem to me forget. I mean, of course, there are issues of equity that come into play, but it's also just bad business. We should not be at this time in a place where people of color who walk into elite areas of racetracks should not be told, as they sometimes are, that they're in the wrong spot or be mistaken for staff. And what we're going to do over the coming weeks isn't only about race. We're going to be talking about women, about LGBTQ issues, and I hope other issues that listeners today and viewers will bring to us. You can ask questions on Facebook at the Racing Biz Facebook page, or you can direct them to me on Twitter, Teresa Gennaro at Brooklyn Backstretch. And we may be able to field some comments on YouTube, but if not, you can certainly ask questions and maybe we can get them answered today. Or please also offer us suggestions for topics that you'd like to see us address going forward.
Excellent, excellent. Greg, is there anything you want to say off the top?
No, just happy to be here. Thank you guys for coming up with the idea to have this platform. Hopefully it's an educational experience for the viewing listeners. And I look forward to the rest of the series with the future panelists that you'll have.
All right, sounds good. So let's start with this question. I wanted to I think it's important that we start from a common place. So let's talk about where we are as an industry in dealing with issues of diversity and inclusion. And I wanted to bring in a little video snippet from Rose Grissell. I asked her, one of the British racing documents says that some people perceive British racing to be sort of out of step with modern British society. And I asked her what that means. Mitchell, can you roll that video?
So it is accessible, but I think for some people, our image is, as I said, kind of perhaps quite, I guess, older or traditional. I think when we also look at those kind of high days, quite a lot of the participants tend to be kind of male dominated and white specifically. So that is potentially out of kilter to some people's reality of their day-to-day life in kind of modern society.
Greg, I'm curious, as a guy who does the bloodstock thing and is trying to put together ownership syndicates. Obviously, British racing is a little different from American racing, but are you experiencing similar concerns from people?
Yes, I think, from the casual fan to those who are deeply entrenched in the business, racing can be perceived as sort of the old guard sport, sort of an elitist sport, if you would, mostly comprised of older, privileged white males. So I don't think that's just unique to British racing. I think that's a thing that's very familiar in North American racing as well.
You guys had told a story about, I think it was the Kentucky Derby draw that I got to be honest, I found a little bit heartbreaking. And I wonder if you could talk about what it was like at the Kentucky Derby draw.
Obviously we're very excited to be participants in the Kentucky Derby. But one of the things that Ray and I quickly noticed that there was very few minority representation from personnel with Churchill Downs. We were obviously representing the African American community. There was another participant there representing the Hispanic Latino community. And it was very apparent, just from a demographic as far as minorities, that there wasn't representation whatsoever on any platform, whether it was media or direct staff, with Churchill Downs. As being a person who's been in the business for a little while now, I've sort of grown accustomed to that. But for Ray Daniels, who was new into the industry, as well as the other gentleman with the other connections with King Guillermo, I think that was something that was astonishing to those participants.
Alicia, do you want to kind of jump in on your sense of where we are as an industry?
Yeah, it's been, to say the last year has been challenging would be an understatement. I have to be honest, I feel like, and those of you who know me, you've probably heard me say this, there are times when I feel like I'm being gaslit by this industry almost on a daily basis, because I will hear some participants or even some executives talk and give interviews talking about, oh, we're making progress, we're doing this, we're doing that. And there's times where like I've almost started crying, or I actually have started crying, because I'm like, am I going crazy? Like, am I just so bitter and jaded that they're making progress and I'm not seeing it? And I'm like, no, they're making you question your own lived experience with that to be true. And the reality is, quite frankly, the industry has done the bare minimum so far to really address these issues in a meaningful way. And we've seen a lot of statements talk about embracing this and everything, but like, for example, representation at the top has been a huge deal. Like I said, if you look at our board, you look at our executives, they're very homogeneous, predominantly white men. I went back and looked, and just since November 30th, I think Churchill Downs, Stronach Group, Keeneland have all announced, by my count, about 8 hirings, promotions, and executives. All 8 of those have been white men. And that's not a knock on those particular individual credentials, but when you talk about embracing diversity and your practices don't line up with it, it makes me question, okay, what are your hiring practices? What do your policies look like? Where are you advertising these jobs? Are you advertising these jobs? How many people were interviewed? How many people from diverse backgrounds were interviewed? How many people of color were interviewed? How extensive was the search for these candidates? Because I have a hard time having, I said, in both my lived experience and my research, finding tangible evidence to support some of these finding tangible evidence that these organizations are backing up their statements with action.
Tracy, you're nodding sagely.
Not particularly sagely, but I mean, I can just second what Alicia said, that I think I've been writing about these issues for 12 years and so little has changed, that it's really frustrating. And, I think that Ray will be able to talk to this as someone who has worked in the corporate world around diversity, and hopefully we can get him on here. But as I said in my opening, it's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do to share opportunity and privilege and access, but it's also just really good for business. I've talked to people in the racing business who are people of color. They've literally had to be in groups of people where the N-word is being used within their earshot. There are trainers on the backstretch whose use of racial slurs is so liberal that sometimes companies that employ people of color won't send them to talk to those people because they're afraid of what might happen. I mean, that's ridiculous in 2020. And so often, when we say things like this, we get this pushback of, oh, it's about hiring the person who's most qualified. And that is either ignorant or just deliberately obtuse, because it suggests from the get-go that the most qualified person is a white man. And if you're not, as Alicia suggested, interviewing a wide range of people for your positions, you don't really know who is most qualified. And frankly, racing could have avoided quite a few mistakes if they had more people with different outlooks. And I think back to last summer when there was a horse called Noose, and people were like, "What's the big deal? So what? There's a horse called Noose." Well, I think if you're a person of color and you go to a sporting event and that is a word that seems to be just okay, you're going to wonder how welcome you are there.
I wonder too, I wanted to sort of jump on, you had alluded to that we'll be also talking about issues with women and women's representation and stuff. And one of the things that I talked with Rose Grissell about it is that, on the one hand, that they perceive as a real strength that it's one of the very few sports where women can compete on a level playing field with men and win. And that's really a positive that they can use for marketing and outreach. And but at the same time, she said, we're realizing, we look at our boards, we look at the executive suite, and they're not there. And one of the things they're starting to push for is 30%, having board composition of the stakeholder organizations be at least 30% female. And that's something, I guess, British sport is kind of a rule with sports that are funded by the government, but they're starting to push for the horse racing stakeholders as well. And I guess I wanted to ask you all if you perceive these issues similarly for women in terms of representation or lack thereof. Teresa, why don't you pick up the ball?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. And I know that there are women in the industry who disagree with me. They think that, and these are incredibly successful women who say that they never faced any bias, that they never faced any obstacles because they were women, and all they had to do was like put their head down and work. And then later they would relate to me stories about trainers hitting on them or trying to grab their butt or having to put up with some really raunchy talk in front of them. That is not an equal playing field. When you feel like you have to be tough enough to overcome sexual harassment in order to do your job, I don't call that an even playing field. And the expectation there is always like, if you want to be part of this world, you need to be tough enough to take it, as opposed to, you know what, maybe that shouldn't be behavior in a professional workplace. I think that there's certainly, over the last decade, there's been improvement. But I still think we often see women involved in the highest levels in issues that are kind of, they're important, but they're sort of the softer side of racing. Lots of women head organizations about aftercare. Not lots of people are the CEOs of racetracks.
To build on, just to build on Teresa's points. I mean, speaking, I've spent the majority of my career as a journalist, and I don't know of any female journalist that doesn't have some story of harassment on the racetrack, be it from executives, be it from trainers. And the sad thing is, it's so commonplace that we almost become I don't know if numb to it is a fair word, but it's just it almost becomes we almost even become desensitized to it ourselves because we're almost expecting it. We're almost bracing for it. We're expecting whether some little comment or something like that. And so it almost gets to the point where we just learn to kind of just work through it. And that sort of thing is not acceptable. And I think too, when you're going to talk about, I said appealing to, like I said, more inclusion in the sport, including, I said people of color, women, LGBTQ community, everybody across the board. Part of that is too, we also as a sport need to look at, our marketing, who we're trying to attract, how we're trying to attract. Racing has had a history, still does, of getting in bed with some problematic entities from a marketing standpoint. If you're going to align yourself with certain companies and entities that spout racism, misogyny, bigotry, transphobia, homophobia, what do you think you're going to attract? What kind of audience do you think you're going to draw in? So if you want to make a more welcoming environment where a woman can walk in and not have to feel like she's going to get harassed on a daily basis, you need to take a look at who you're also aligning with and who you're partnering with and what you're doing to try to draw a new audience in and how you're trying to draw it in.
Greg, anything you wanted to add on that topic?
I think both of the ladies spoke very well, on that. Just as a whole, though, the industry has to and needs to do more. Very rarely do you see a woman in a key role within the industry. Keeneland recently hired their first female president executive. But outside of Keeneland, outside of Linda Rice, as far as being one of the leading trainers in New York, and very few female jockeys do you see females in a prominent position or position of authority and power in racing. And that's something that's unfortunate and needs to change.
And to add to that, where are my black women in this industry? Where are my women of color? I mean, there's already obviously a very few people of color in positions of power and influence. As black women, who are we looking to? Who am I looking to? Who else do I have to look to in this industry?
We've got a question here from somebody on Twitter that I think I'm going to ask, and I think anybody can answer this. As racing is often called a dying industry, that the industry is looking for ways to grow it in ways that are not always successful. And this question is, are there unique challenges to addressing inequality issues in an industry that is not a growing industry? And I wonder, Greg, if that's something that you want to speak to in terms of your trying to get owners in the game, because it seems to me that's about both growing the industry and dealing with inequality.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret the industry as a whole is struggling right now to attract new fans. That's something that we need to come together and figure out a better way to market this sport. It's a great sport, but unfortunately, it's just not being marketed correctly. I think I take for granted living in Lexington and seeing all the young people that come out and attend Keeneland in the spring and the fall meets. But when you go to other racetracks, you don't see that younger generation embracing racing like you do here in my hometown. But in saying that, there's much more of a challenge in bringing in minorities into this business as well. I mean, when you look at it from a marketing standpoint, there's nothing strategically done to target minorities or people of color. Once you get people to the racetrack, it's well when you go on the backside, you see people of color, in a groom position or exercise rider or hot walker. But when you go over to the front side of racing, there's no representation at all. When I'm bringing in new people as potential investors or something, that's often a question that I'm asked. Where are the racing officials? Where are the racing executives and things of that nature? So it's very difficult for me to get people of color into this business. Once we get them in, when they see no representation at all, one of the first things they ask, well, why do I want to invest in something where I'm not necessarily feel welcomed or see someone like me in a position of power?
I think a sport that is dealing with a similar issue, that has a similar demographic, that has actually made some steps in that along the same lines. You all have heard me talk about this, is NASCAR. NASCAR has been dealing with a similar issue, a declining fan base, declining ratings, declining attendance and everything. And NASCAR is another sport that had a very homogeneous demographic. And last year we saw where they, and again, NASCAR has a long way to go. I say this as a NASCAR fan. I've been watching that sport since I was little. NASCAR has a long way to go, but NASCAR last year, to its credit, took some tangible steps. They banned the Confederate flag at their tracks. They, they openly really supported Bubba Wallace and everything. And while they have a ways to go, they are already reaping the benefits of the progress that they have made, because who do they have now that is getting involved in NASCAR on an ownership side? They have Michael Jordan now as a NASCAR owner. They have Pitbull as an owner. They have I'm going to forget the man's name, but one of the NFL players, they just did an interview with him where he talked about he got involved. He started paying attention to NASCAR last year, something he said he wouldn't have done if they had not taken steps to ban the Confederate flag. And now he's such a fan where he's telling his teammates, I will pay you to come to a race with me to see how great it is, to see how fun it is, to see how cool it is. Can you imagine if we got that here? What would racing give to have a Michael Jordan invest in their sport? That would be so huge, but you have to be willing to lose something in order to gain. And so my question for the racing industry is, are you willing to lose anything? NASCAR was willing to lose some of their old fan base for the sake of gaining a new sustainable one, hopefully. I'm waiting to see if thoroughbred racing will take those kind of similar steps, because they are seeing the payoff from it.
And if I could just jump in and follow up with something you were telling us the other day, Greg, that on the backside, it's difficult for people of color to move up from being the grooms and the hot walkers and the exercise riders to trainers, because many of the big owners in the sport tend not to give horses to the little guy. And you were talking specifically about Black trainers like Uriah St. Louis and Gaston Grant, and a couple of others. And you talked about why they have been able to at least modestly make it. And I wonder if you would share that with us.
Yeah, well, you look at the guys that you just mentioned, as well as Charlton Baker, won a Grade 1 several years back in New York. The thing that they all have in common is they support themselves with horses that they've either purchased outright themselves or with horses that they bred themselves. But you don't see an overall support from the industry after they've proven and broken down barriers of winning graded races or Grade 1 races, of owners wanting to send them horses, especially horses that could compete on a top tier level. So you begin to ask yourself, after they put in the hard work and they've proven that they can compete against the best, why is there not more gravitation towards them as far as owners sending them horses?
It strikes me one of the things that has come up, and it always comes up in these conversations, is the concept of welcome. Are we welcoming people into the industry? And I actually had that conversation with Rose Grissell as well, because people here and there, people in the industry say, "Oh, it's welcoming. We'll let anybody in," and to some extent that's true. The doors are open; everybody can walk in. But I asked her, is that what she really means by welcoming, or is that a word she wants to do a little more work than just meaning the doors are open? And Mitchell, could you roll the welcoming clip, please?
However, I guess part of that statement is also questioning or enabling us to question why people aren't walking through, or all types of people, I should say, are not walking through our open doors. And, there are probably slightly more hidden or subtle barriers that are in place. We are, simply not engaging with kind of certain groups of the population in the UK, whether that's through kind of perception or kind of reality of barriers. Our marketing and media kind of present racing in a certain way, which potentially could be seen as I've touched on, like exclusive to some. And I think we can't be naive to think that, or even arrogant enough to think that just because we've opened the doors, people are going to kind of walk in. We have to go and then show them why racing is a sport for them, and a sport that they can really be part of and love, like so many do already. So I think it's really as I say, kind of questioning ourselves of why, even though we feel we are inclusive and welcoming, why that is only to certain people and not to all people.
Is that
Facebook
something that
I think
that you
sorry.
kind of hear? It's quite all right. That you kind of hear from when you're trying to bring new people into the industry. Can anyone
Greg,
hear
that
me?
was to you, I think.
Greg?
I'm sorry, the audio went out, so I didn't hear anything.
That's all right. Did you hear what she said about that basically they feel like the industry is welcoming to some people but not to others, and that there may be barriers that we have not yet acknowledged? And I'm wondering if you hear stuff like that from when you're trying to bring new people in.
Well, I mean, that's the old adage that they say the industry is welcoming. As long as you have the money, you can be a participant. I mean, that's fine and good. But, once you get people and they step up and they spend their money, I mean, what do you do to retain those people? What do you do to bring in a plethora of people that necessarily know nothing about the business from a marketing standpoint? I mean, when you look at a lot of the commercials that advertise racing, there's nothing specific to people of color. When you look through the programs, there's not any representation. So there's a lot of basic stuff that just could be done that's just not being done. It's frustrating at times to see what is obvious to me. That when you go to other things such as hockey, Alicia had mentioned NASCAR, tennis, sports that are considered mainstream that at one time or another wasn't necessarily marketing to minorities, recognize that it's a problem, hire outsiders that specialize in matters such as this, and really taking a strong approach to it and changing things.
Alicia, you were
If I could
nodding
just
when
ask,
we came back.
I'm sorry, Teresa, did you have?
well, there's a question here on Facebook that I think ties into this. And it's, do you think urban tracks like Pimlico, and I think I would add to that Aqueduct, Churchill, I'm sure there are others, are missed opportunities to bring people of color into the industry and fans into the sport? I mean, a lot of these tracks are in neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color, yet those aren't the people who are necessarily coming over to the front side or being wooed as customers. And I wonder what you think about that sort of community partnership or outreach, Greg.
Yeah, I think there's a lot could be done. As you said, a lot of these racetracks are in the inner city. I don't have the numbers before me, but I would pose a question: what type of work is the track itself doing in the neighborhoods as far as outreach to bring in the younger generation, to educate the younger generation about the contributions that African Americans have made? Are they meeting with community leaders to recognize that it is a problem? And going out and marketing and just say, we want to bring you in, for a special day with no entry, things of that nature, something as simple as a free $2 or $5 wager. There's a lot of things that could be done. And as you mentioned, a lot of these tracks are in the inner city, but what type of outreach is actually being done within the community of the racetrack to attract the people that actually live in and around the racetrack? That's something that I can't answer because I'm not an executive, at a lot of these racetracks. But, as far as I know, a lot of these racetracks just aren't simply doing that work with the community that surrounds them.
I think racing has gotten itself into a little bit of this vicious circle of thinking that it needs to be aspirational. It needs to only cater to, oh, we want the 1%, we want the Millionaires Row, we want this, and they neglect a lot of their everyday customer, quite frankly, their everyday horse player, but they also, as Greg touched on, and I'm disappointed we haven't been able to get Ray on yet because Ray actually spoke about this the other day as well, about that war community, what other sports have done. The NBA has been very at the forefront of that. The WNBA has been at the forefront of that. Quite frankly, you mentioned Teresa, and Teresa, I believe you've even written about this before, especially with Pimlico. I have had people make so many disparaging comments to me about the neighborhood around there. I had a former colleague actually say to me one time when we were discussing Preakness of better make sure that you pack your knife when you go there. And I'm like, And I felt like saying to him, oh, so you automatically assume that underprivileged brown people means dangerous? Have you ever spent any time in their neighborhoods? Have you ever spent any time in that community? Because I've been covering the Preakness since 2003, and I have had not one problem, not one. In fact, I routinely boast that the Preakness is my favorite Triple Crown race to cover because I just never have a problem there. But they have this attitude, they go in with this attitude about their own communities, some of them around it. And it's like, have you even spent any time in there? Have you ever tried to do any outreach? But it's almost like, I feel like the education needs to be such a key part of this, because I feel like there is a lot of willful ignorance in this industry, but there's also just a lot of genuine ignorance of, I think there's such a blind spot with that people, they don't even genuinely know where to begin. They don't know what programs are out there. They don't know how to connect with their communities. They don't know about programs like HBCU 2020, which will get graduates and students, that's one of the biggest ones, to get a pipeline to get jobs and internships for their students. I think that like I said, there is a lot of, they don't want to be better, but I also think I think that they're just genuinely clueless sometimes with all of this.
I think Teresa's speaking, but we can't hear her.
Can't hear you, Teresa.
Okay. Teresa, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Alicia, since you work at the NTRA, this is a question off Twitter that I think might be sort of up your alley. Does racing's decentralized nature inhibit greater diversity? Would a stronger league office be able to encourage it more? Do you think that the fact that the industry is so fractured and every track has its own marketing plan and there's not a lot of unity, or really industry-wide strategy make this harder?
It does. Yes, the lack of a central body can, like I said, that has been a problem for tackling a number of issues in the sport. Having said that, I don't use that as an excuse for this industry, again, to not make more progress on this, because I do think the industry has shown that it can rally and it can work together for issues that are deemed important to them. We just saw the industry, a lot of the entities, our biggest entities, come together to get the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act passed. We saw a lot of support within the state of Kentucky here to get the historical horse racing bill to make sure that got passed. This industry can rally together when it wants to, when it's motivated to, when they feel like it's in their best interest. So while, yes, having a centralized body like the British Horseracing Authority does, obviously, that's why they've been able to have their plan in place for a few years now, would definitely make things easier. It's still, in my opinion, not an excuse, because these companies can lead by example as well. You may not have a centralized body, but you can take the lead on things. And again, we've seen them do that with other issues. They are coming together to work. We're going to implement this rule on this whip reform. We're going to implement this rule on LASIX. They are capable of coming together on the same page if they want to.
I want to jump on what, and it looks like Ray has joined us, so we're going to get Ray in a minute. I just want to jump on what Alicia just said, and A, agree with everything she said, and B, maybe even go a step farther and say, I think that people always use racing's decentralized nature as, we can't do this because 30 odd states, blah, 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 blah. It's a cop-out. It's a 100% cop-out. And the real answer is, okay, who's doing it right? Which are the racing companies, which are the racing states that you look at and say, that's how it should be. Those guys are leaders on diversity. They're the people who are handling everything the way it should be handled. That's racing done right. And the answer is no one. You don't look at any place and say that's how it all should be. That's the company that's doing it right. That's the state that's got it all fixed. And so it's not our decentralized nature. It's just not. And I'll shut up now. But want to welcome Ray. Can you hear us? Are you here?
Yeah. Can you hear me is more important.
I think we can. I think we can. We've been talking about a wide variety of things here, and one of the issues that one of the issues, and maybe we'll ask you this as a jumping off point for you getting involved. We were kind of asking people where they perceive racing to be in terms of diversity and inclusion, and you're a guy who's the major pathways of your life are outside this vineyard, and you kind of come in and visit, and I guess I'd be curious, and you have this experience as a chief diversity officer for a major corporation. What's your take?
Well, I mean, if I backtrack, I think first and foremost, you've got to have courageous conversations. You've got to be able to talk openly about whatever is going on inside the industry that is a barrier to minorities getting involved, at the gate or whether and during those courageous conversations, if you don't think you have anything to add to it, then what you need to do is just listen, find out what the other side, the other perspective is, and have a greater understanding of these barriers to getting to the industry. And I think that's where it all starts. That's what it happens with business. So it starts there, and then I think you have to have one person in every organization that is in charge of diversity and inclusion. It doesn't happen unless somebody wakes up every day trying to figure out how to improve and fix the problem, and come up with common sense solutions. And that one person needs to report to an executive level or a cabinet level, so it carries the impact that it warranted.
Are there any questions off Twitter or Facebook, Teresa, that you want to bring us? I don't think we can hear you, Teresa.
I keep muting myself because the cats are playing in the background and I want that to be on and distracting, but then I forget to unmute myself, so sorry. Ryan on Twitter is asking, one thing people talk about is getting to youth and getting them interested in racing at an early age, especially in underprivileged areas. And I know in New York, there's a program called Ice Hockey in Harlem. And there are similar initiatives around other sports. So Brian asks, the family of the first Black female jockey, Cheryl White, has wanted to do this with the foundation they've set up in her memory, but the foundation hasn't raised much. Why can't all of racing get behind something like that? Right now, it's just a GoFundMe. What better way to get more diversity involved in the sport from a young age? And how can we get more publicity and more support for initiatives like this? And
Greg, I think you should take that and use it in, like I said, the work that yourself and Ray are doing with the Ed Brown Society.
Yeah, since Ray's on here, I'll let him dig in it a little deeper, if you would, Ray.
Yeah, so that's a great question about nonprofits. And if you'll bear with me 1 second, when people talk about diversity and inclusion and unconscious bias training, racism training, implicit bias training, call it what you want, you have to understand the economic that we have into criminal issues that we have. So, pipeline is a real thing, and it starts from when kids, brown and black kids, are disciplined, suspended, or school more often than their white counterparts, and in their class, and that leads to them getting involved with undesirable people and doing things that they shouldn't be involved in. So anybody doing any kind of to expose any black and brown kid to something different than what they're used to or what they've seen is a thing that we all need to get behind. Our goal should be to keep kids in school, keep them focused on their learning, keep them out of trouble, and give them access to greater employment opportunities that exist in this billion-dollar industry in the United States. So we have started like the caller or the tweeted in about that nonprofit, and we're going to have the same problems and the same issues that they face. We're going to have to figure out how to raise money, how to bring awareness, how to talk about our strategic plan of what we're trying to get done. And all we're trying to get done is bring these unbelievable exposures to fruition and bring them to actual internships, apprenticeships, and then jobs. A lot of mid-level management positions and jobs in the equine industry in particular, and in the veterinary industry in particular. And then loop that in with some of the colleges that are doing very good work on the veterinary side and build in a scholarship base to that. So we're going to try to keep kids educated, keep them learning, and keep the exposures going.
I would just like to jump in and add here that, Greg and Ray are doing this work, and they've been doing this work. And I've been fortunate enough specifically to know Greg for some years now, and he has put so much time and effort into trying to get new people and people of color involved in this industry. And there's other people who are doing the work as well, people like Ron Mack from the Legacy Equine Academy. But what I want, again, to remind people is it shouldn't just be on them to do the work. Just like it is not on Black people to solve racism, it should not just be on them to do the work. The culture of this industry needs to change, because you can bring new people in, but if the culture still does not change, if they are not welcomed, if they are not embraced, if they are not valued, if they get in, we can have new people come in and new blood come in, but I don't want to have, like I said, these people with their passion come in and end up being marginalized or dismissed or dehumanized in any sort of way and have that passion killed. So unless, for it to be, again, sustainable, the culture itself has to change. It's not just about, hiring numbers or hiring a few more faces. Only when our perspectives are valued, when they are welcomed, when they are embraced, that is when real change will happen here. But again, it cannot just be on them. And again, there's really no excuse for some of our larger corporations and tracks to not start doing the work themselves of doing them outreach to see how they, like I said, who they can partner with, what organizations they can partner with schools they can partnership, how they can get involved with scholarships to be part of that solution themselves.
And I would just add on to, Alicia, what you said, and that Black people in your companies whose job it is to do something else, to also become the unpaid diversity coordinator. And that goes for women as well. Don't take some really smart, vibrant, very busy woman in your organization and say, hey, can you teach us about women in leadership? There are organizations out there, they're experts in this. Asking people to do that kind of labor for free is exploitive, and there are plenty of people out there that you can pay to do this and bring into your organizations, so that people like Alicia can do the job she's paid to do. Not a knock against the NTRA there, just an example.
No, thank you for saying that, because my sister's a pharmaceutical rep. She's dealing with a similar thing where she's trying to get a diversity initiative off the ground with her company. And I keep telling her, Michelle, how much are you getting paid for this? Are they compensating you? If this is so valuable to them, they need to compensate you for that. And yes, I also need to practice what I preach on that end as well. But I'm glad that you brought that point up, because, I actually listened to a wonderful panel the other week by this company called A Call to Men that had a panel about centering Black feminist perspectives on racial and gender and social justice work. Everybody go to that website and check it out, because it's necessary viewing. A Call to Men. I'm going to give a plug to them right there because they're great. But almost felt at one point clapping because one of the wonderful panelists said, stop calling on Black women to save you. And yes, stop calling on us only when things are going sideways, and also stop looking to us and to people of color to educate you and to provide your dissertations. If you really want to do the work, there's been enough time and information out there if you want to do the work. And I've struggled with the balance of very well-meaning people wanting to know how they can help, what they can do. And it is a balance, because you want to be a guiding voice, but you also don't want to, at some point, you don't want to be taken advantage of. So there is a lot of resources out there. There's meeting material, there's books, there's training. So any aspiring ally, if you really want to do the work, please educate yourself and do not put it on people of color to do that work for you.
One topic I'd like to make sure we touch on here as we're coming to the end of the hour that we had planned. I don't want to make anyone stop talking, so we could go past if that's what people want to do. But I want to make sure we touch on this topic, which we have been touching on in many different ways. But in talking with Rose Grissell of the British Horseracing Authority, she said, look, doing the, increasing inclusiveness, increasing diversity in the industry, it's the right thing to do. It's the morally right thing to do. It's ethically, correct. It's a good thing to do, and we should do it for those reasons. But she said, look, let's be honest. What's really going to move the meter is the business case for diversity and inclusion. And I asked her, okay, give us the business case. What is the business case? And here's what she had to say. Mitchell, can you roll that, please?
But yeah, as you say, the business case is really the true driver of this from a commercial point of view for the whole industry. And simply putting it, if we want racing to survive as a sport, but also to grow as a sport and an industry, we have to focus on creating or in helping it become more diverse and more inclusive. And that's for a number of reasons, really. But really, we want to widen the audiences and the fan base of racing. And so how do we do that? We need to do that to, in effect, increase revenues for the sport. So whether that's through people betting on the sport, people buying tickets on the sport for the sport, but any kind of general interest will only increase ownership, horses in training. And of course, we've seen it in other sports, the support from kind of corporate companies and government as well. Here we've had, big corporate sponsorship deals in the last couple of years for female women's sport, namely in football. And, we know that corporate companies and governments really want to support diverse sport. So in order for us to kind of have our chunk of that as well as a sport competing with others who are likewise, driving this agenda forward as racing as a sport, we in effect are competing with them as well. And, they can see the business case, so certainly we can as well. But also from an employment point of view, finally, it's really important that we recruit and retain the best talent, again, for that delivery of the growth of the sport. We want to ensure that we've got the best people working in it, and we only will attract individuals if we're seen as a diverse and inclusive sport.
Ray, I wonder if you could respond to that as a guy coming from more of a corporate perspective, and particularly a thing that you had mentioned when we talked the other day that I thought was very, very interesting and dovetails with Rose's last point is kind of the workforce development angle of this.
Yeah, I think she hit it right on the nail, by the way. We have conclusive data across the board. There's indisputable that diverse and inclusive organizations are more proficient and make more money than companies that aren't. They're in the upper quartile of every kind of industry you could ever desire. Manufacturing, industrial, you name it. The ones that are more diverse and have more inclusivity within their organizations, whether it be sex, age, religion, you name it, are more productive and produce more revenues. I think as a whole, this is really a workforce issue. It's a talent issue. It's a retention issue. All industries are trying to figure out how to retain their people and how to grow their talent base that they have working inside the organizations. They're all trying to figure out continuing education and so on and so forth. So most of them are going early and they're going often. And most of them are working with their local colleges on down into their 2-year colleges. And the smart ones are down into the high schools and working in the career academies, so to speak, where they're producing talent. They're giving their time and their money, working with the school systems to show what their industry is all about, what the skill sets that are needed, and the type of folks that they would like to get involved. And then they're letting those people enter into their organizations and complete apprenticeships, internships, and get their accreditations for different things inside the organization. So this is a workforce arms issue when it comes to diversity. Most in industries have figured out that the world is turning more brown and black, and it makes sense to recruit more of that talent on the workforce side. Now, she spoke the breadth and depth of the customer side. It's the same deal for me on the being more inclusive and being more diverse. That's just a market that the industry should be going after, should be entertaining, and should be trying their best to come and visit all of these wonderful tracks that we have.
One statistic that really grabbed me, Alicia provided me a PowerPoint by a group called As You Sow, and they're a nonprofit dealing with diversity and stuff. And they had this presentation, and one of the points they made is that by 2045, the United States is projected to have a majority of minorities. So we're going to be a majority minority country. In other words, racing needs to start figuring this out, or we're going to be speaking to less than half the country in a very short period of time. Greg, do you see? I did want to ask you. Do you? I think you would see also the business case here for greater diversity and inclusiveness in terms of the stuff you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, as a whole, handle, is down. People actually going in. There's only so many top tier buyers that you're going to have when you go to these horse sales. Diversity just opens up the marketplace to so much more. You have new people coming in that's funneling new money, new buyers, new horse ownerships. It's just a good thing all around. It's something that's needed, and it's something that's going to be paramount if this industry will continue to survive.
One question that came in through our form here, and I think, well, I'm curious as to whether people agree with the premise here, and if so, how they would answer it. The question is, women are accepted as jockeys, grooms, trainers, as assistants, as are African Americans, as are Hispanics. It seems to me, says the writer, that economic opportunity is the biggest problem affecting diversity in thoroughbred racing. Any ideas how to remedy that? So I guess the first question is, do you agree with the premise? And the second is, if so, how would you remedy that? And I'll throw it open here. Anybody want to field that one?
So is the question. So they're saying that they feel like the industry is accepting to all the different to women in minority in all roles.
Well, the writer specifically mentioned trainer, assistant, kind of backstretch roles, and I think she was saying it is open to minorities in all those backstretch roles, and the issue is economic.
So I guess what I would say, the backstretch may be, but have you visited the front side of a racetrack?
Yes.
Tell me where's the representation or inclusion on the front side. I'm tired of hearing the narrative. If you come in and you put in the hard work, you can make it. There's no representation at the key core leadership positions in racing that would demonstrate what the majority of the world looks like, which is a diversified world that we live in.
Exactly.
So when I hear comments like that, when I hear comments like that, it really upsets me. Because what that tells me is that as minorities, you've already regulated us to a career position on the backside.
And so many of those people on the backside, they are in vulnerable positions. That is our most valuable, part of our industry, but also our most vulnerable. And a lot of them are not even in position to kind of take a stand or stand up for themselves. Even, the coronavirus pandemic exposed a lot of things, and it also exposed a lot of privilege. I mean, how many people on the backstretch, with the coronavirus, if you're infected, you're supposed to isolate. They don't have that privilege to isolate back there. A lot of them, like I said, they can't work remotely. Those horses still have to be taken care of, and they are going to take care of their horses. But also, they don't. A lot of them do not live in a situation where they are able to isolate from other people. So I think, yeah, Greg hit the nail on the head. That's actually a very problematic part of this industry.
And I would just add to that, when, Alicia, you used the word vulnerable. You know, I've talked to women on the backstretch who have undergone sexual assault, and they've undergone sexual harassment so they could keep their jobs. But this is such a small industry that they can't speak up because they're afraid they'll get fired, they need the job, and that they won't get hired by anybody else. And I think that this isn't just about issues of sexual harassment, but it's about poor working conditions. It's about being underpaid. And when you have a structure that relies on your labor but doesn't elevate your position so that you've got some security and authority, that's not about hard work. That's about a system that's working against you and making sure that you don't rise up from it.
All right, I think we've probably gone about an hour, and it's probably about as far as we want to go. I do want to give anyone here who has final words they want to add. Greg, Ray, Alicia, Teresa, any final thoughts here?
Just that I would love it if some of our racing executives, and we probably will be reaching out with them, I would love to have some of our racing executives be able to come on and have a real discussion with us, so that especially we can, if there are tangible things that they're doing in the works, we would love to hear about that. We want to hear about the progress that they are making. Like I said, selfishly, I want to see their actions match their statements. So any executive who is willing to come on, we would love to have you, and we would love to hear what you're doing.
And I would just reiterate what I said. I would just reiterate what I said at the top. If there are topics that you would like to see us discuss, if you have a story to tell and you'd like to be a part of us, please get in touch with Alicia or Frank or me via the many ways that we are available to you: email, Twitter, Facebook, etc.
Absolutely. Anything last things, Greg or Ray?
Thank you for the opportunity.
That you got to have these conversations, and you have to have them often. And you can call them what you want, call them courageous conversations if you like, but you have to have them often. And then you have to have an action plan coming out of all of these conversations about short-term, long-term, mid-term